Okay, so we've got a real doozy for you today. A case that spans decades and crosses international borders. We're talking court transcripts, legal battles in two countries, the whole shebang.
Wow. Sounds like a real legal thriller.
It is, and you want to know exactly what happened, right?
Absolutely. Let's untangle this web of litigation.
All right, so this case, we're calling it Middich versus Mercantile Insurance for short. And it all starts with a tragedy.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Back in 1991 in San Diego, California, a man named Charles Middich, he owned a nightclub called Clubtronics. And one night, there was a shooting in the club parking lot. A patron, Theodore Zudelam, tragically lost his life.
Ah, that's awful, a nightclub shooting. These things are always so tragic.
They are. And that's where things get legally complicated. When someone dies due to negligence, their family can file what's called a wrongful death lawsuit.
Right away to hold the responsible party accountable.
Exactly.
So in this case, the family's going after the nightclub owner.
They are. And Middich, being a responsible business owner, he had liability insurance with a company called Mercantile Insurance.
Okay, so he turns to them for support,
Mm-hmm.
expecting them to uphold their end of the policy and provide legal defense. That's what insurance is for, right?
Exactly. And initially, they did assign him a lawyer, seemed ready to back him up.
Okay.
But then, right in the middle of the trial, get this Mercantile withdraws their support.
Oh, they completely abandoned him in the middle of a trial.
They left him to navigate this wrongful death lawsuit completely on his own.
That's not just bad business. That's a serious legal breach.
Yeah.
Insurance companies have a fundamental duty to defend their policyholders.
A duty they very clearly violated.
So what did Middich do?
Well, to understand the severity of this, we need to talk about bad faith in insurance law. This goes beyond just breaking a promise. We're talking about acting unreasonably and unfairly towards the policyholder, often for financial gain. It could be denying valid claims without even investigating, delaying payments, or in this case, withdrawing legal defense without justification.
Improving bad faith can cost these insurance companies.
Big time, often exceeding the original policy limits.
So back to the case, what happened?
Well, the jury ultimately found in favor of the Zudelam estate. Michich was ordered to pay $285,500 in damages.
Wow.
But that was just the beginning. Middich was understandably outraged by Mercantile's actions, and he decided to fight back. He filed his own lawsuit against them, alleging breach of contract and, you guessed it, bad faith.
Makes sense, but remember, Mercantile is based in the Philippines. International lawsuits add a whole other layer of complication.
You're telling me serving legal documents across international borders, it's a whole other beast.
So how do they even serve Mercantile?
Mitchich's team, they tried to serve them with the lawsuit 3 times.
3 times.
3 times, each attempt meticulously documented.
And
Crickets. Mercantile, they remained silent. They completely ignored the legal proceedings in California.
so they're just going to pretend it's not happening.
Well, that's what they tried to do. But the California court, seeing no defense, no acknowledgement, nothing from Mercantile, they issued a default judgment against the insurance company.
For how much?
A staggering $11,135,929.14.
Over $1 million. That's a hefty price tag for ignoring a lawsuit.
It is, and that's where things get really interesting, because now we have a California court judgment against a company in the Philippines.
Right, so can they even enforce that? Can you just ignore the ruling of a foreign court? We're about to enter some murky international legal waters.
Murky is an understatement. So they have
Yeah.
this $1.1 million judgment hanging over their heads. You'd think Mercantile would be scrambling to make things right.
Right, it's a lot of money.
It is. But instead, they decided to dig in their heels, launched a legal battle that would drag on for decades. Midich's victory in California, that was just the first act in this international legal drama. The next challenge, getting a Philippine court to actually recognize and enforce that American judgment.
Yeah, that's not always easy. Imagine you have this legal document from one country saying a debt exists, right? And you're trying to tell a court in another country, well, they have to enforce it. Different legal systems, different cultures. It's a whole thing.
And Mercantile, they knew how to exploit those complexities. Their main line of defense was challenging the California court's jurisdiction.
Oh.
Basically, they're saying, hey, we're a Philippine company. We shouldn't be subject to the rulings of a U.S. court.
Interesting. But they did business in California, right? They insured a business there.
They did, and their lawyers really hammered on the whole service of summons thing. Remember those documents that officially notify someone of legal action against them?
Right.
Mercantile claimed that the service was improper despite documented proof of multiple attempts.
So they're saying they never officially got served.
Mm.
Bold strategy.
It was, and they were really hoping to use it to their advantage. See, it all boils down to lex fori. It's Latin for law of the forum. Basically means the case should be governed by the laws of the country where the court is.
Ah, so they're thinking if it's before a Philippine court, then Philippine law should apply.
Exactly.
Well,
Hoping to maybe invalidate the California ruling.
clever.
And this wasn't a quick strategy either. Mercantile, they knew how to play the long game, filing multiple appeals, claiming procedural errors, anything to keep the case tied up in court.
Delay, delay, delay.
Oh, they even tried to argue that a typo on the default judgment invalidated the whole thing. We're talking about the year being listed as 1992 instead of 1991.
Wow, really grasping at straws there. But hey, if it works, it works.
And it's important to remember, these tactics aren't just about avoiding payment. Every year that passes, that's more financial strain on Midich. He's got legal fees in 2 countries now on top of the original judgment.
It's like they're trying to bleed him dry.
They very well might be. This went on for an astounding 2 decades. 20 years of legal battles stemming from one night in a San Diego nightclub.
Wow. At what point does justice delayed become justice denied?
It's a question worth asking, and it gets even more complicated. This whole situation brought into play the idea of processual presumption. Basically, it means if one side doesn't provide enough evidence of the other country's relevant laws, the court can just apply its own domestic laws.
Interesting. So that could work for or against Midich, depending on how the Philippine court interprets things.
Exactly. It was a gamble. So after 20 years of legal limbo, did the Philippine courts side with the company that seemed to have mastered the art of legal evasion, or did they uphold the California judgment and deliver a long-awaited victory to Charles Midich?
Well, it's not a simple answer. In a twist that I don't think anyone could have predicted, they ruled in favor of Midich.
After all that, they actually agreed he deserved to be paid.
Partially.
Partially. What's the catch?
While the Philippine Supreme Court agreed that Mercantile had to pay the original $1.1 million judgment, they refused to enforce the 10% annual interest that had been accumulating.
Hold on. Are we talking about 3 decades worth of interest here?
3 decades exactly, a sum that would be astronomical by now. It was wiped away just like that.
Wow. So much for that justice delayed is justice denied idea.
Well, they did call the accruing interest iniquitous, especially given that the California court had already hit Mercantile with moral and punitive damages.
So those are on top of just the regular money he lost. Punitive damages are meant to punish bad behavior, right?
Exactly. And in this case, abandoning your client mid-trial, that's pretty outrageous. So the California court tacked on those penalties.
Interesting. So not a complete victory for Midich, no millions in interest, but he can finally try to collect on that original judgment.
After 30 years, a bittersweet victory for sure. But this case, man, it really exposes how tough it could be to get justice, especially when you're up against a company with deep pockets, willing to drag things out in court for decades.
It's like they were trying to wait him out, make it so expensive he'd just give up.
It happens all the time. And it makes you wonder, in a globalized world with companies operating across borders, how can we make sure that everyone is playing by the rules, that there's real accountability?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in a way, I guess that's what this whole deep dive comes down to. The fight for a just system never really ends, even when the gavel slams down.